is not yet been incorporated as being held centrally because there are issues to be resolved around that particular amount of money.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, should I be adjourning the debate at this time, or no, just, oh, okay. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I was thinking about light debate. Okay, so, well, my next question then is a question about the fact that there seemed to be so little excess capacity in the acute care system around the Christmas period, the holiday period, when, first of all, you had people taking some Christmas break, and there was an outbreak of flu, and then you had the ongoing pressures on the emergency departments generally. And I want to ask the minister, what analysis has the department done with respect to the capacity of emergency rooms around the province to be able to cope with a flu outbreak, some kind of scenario that places additional pressures on the emergency rooms? I have heard many people say that what we've done in our healthcare system, what we've done in our emergency rooms, for example, is we've adopted those just-in-time kinds of managerial practices where you squeeze every bit of excess capacity out of the system so that you staff it with certain assumptions that people are always going to be busy based on a kind of flow of people through that department. But if in fact you have a bottleneck at one end, or you have a greater inflow from another end, then you don't have the capacity to be able to deal with that. So I wonder, has the department looked at whether or not we have left so little excess capacity inside our emergency departments that this will be an ongoing kind of problem that we'll see every so often in a cyclical kind of way?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, and Mr. Chairman, the situation to which the honourable member refers is indeed one of the great challenges that faces the healthcare delivery system, and that is the capacity to be able to operate your emergency services where you have a situation that it is extremely difficult to predict the input that, or the people who show up at and look for emergency services, and your capacity to be able to respond to them. There are some patterns that do emerge that assist in the planning process. There are times of the year that wind up historically appearing to be busier than others, and the DHAs and we work with them in terms of attempting to address those things that become identified through the process and try to incorporate some of that into the planning. I'm not suggesting that that's done easily. It is very difficult to be able to provide any sort of accurate predictions. And obviously, I'm, Mr. Chairman, I'm extremely reluctant to use the term flu in relation to emergency rooms based on what I went through in January when we talked about this. But indeed, the flu did play some part. It was not the in the final analysis. It was curing the flu was not the solution to the emergency room situation in Halifax, if I can say it that way. But it does. The outbreak of the flu does put pressure on emergency rooms throughout the province, and there is a great challenge in trying to organize yourselves to be able to meet with that. What I can say to the honourable member is that we work with the DHAs to try and learn from every experience to see if there are things that we can do that will assist us in the future in terms of being organized to respond to sudden increases in demand. Now, obviously, part of what we had to do in the capital district was recognize that there were bottlenecks at the end of the process that needed to be freed up to allow us to move things through more quickly, and we're addressing that. There's some temporary beds have been opened. I will be having more to say about that in the very near future relative to a longer-term solution to that particular problem. So the honourable member puts her finger, Mr. Chairman, on a very real challenge that the healthcare system has. We do work with the DHAs in trying to learn as much as we can from every situation that presents itself and to become better organized. I'm not going to stand here today and say that we have the situation totally under control. Hopefully, every experience will allow us to improve and better deliver emergency health services as we move forward. Perhaps while I have the floor, Mr. Chair, I can relate that while I agree with the honourable member that the solution with respect to the Capital District emergency situation is not in hand, we are making very real progress relative to that. As I just indicated, we've done something in a very significant way to remove the bottleneck at the end of the process. We are proceeding with the plans to increase the size of the emergency room facility, and the honourable member would appreciate that problem is one that really dates back to the opening of that facility, when it was anticipated that there would in fact be two emergency rooms, two emergency facilities that would accommodate the demand in this area, and the second was never opened. To the credit of the planners at the time, they did set aside space in that building where we're now able to move into in order to increase the capacity of the emergency facilities. So those steps are happening, and they're not things that you can do overnight. But there are some shorter-term measures, mostly under the control of the District Health Authority, that have been taking, that are easing some of the pressure. And I'm not in any way suggesting that that very significant progress has been made, but some progress is being made. But we have taken a step that will result in the bottleneck at the end of the process being alleviated. And once the construction is completed, then we should be in a much better position to facilitate and meet the demand that presents itself in that facility.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the minister. I'm going to ask the minister two things. One is just a minor follow-up question, which I probably should already know the answer to, but I don't. And that is the planned expansion of the emergency room. When, where is that at right now, and when is it anticipated that the expanded emergency room will actually be completed? So that's one thing I'd like to know. And the other thing I'd like to know is this. This is back to my concern about whether or not the DHAs have are adequately funded now so that they're stable in terms of the pressures on them. Back sometime this winter, there was a report, I think, in the Daily News that talked about some hospital beds in the province that were underutilized. Beds that were utilized at maybe a rate of 50, 60%, 40%. I can't remember the exact figure, but I remember at the time, and I think the Premier spoke to this afterwards, they were in Guysborough, Canso, really small locations, possibly Tatamagouche, maybe Fisherman's Memorial, possibly Annapolis. I don't have the actual article in front of me, but I know that for these communities, for people who live in these communities, there is grave concern that information appearing in the paper and the comments that were made by government members were a signal that those beds were being examined and they were being looked at for the potential of whether or not they would be left in those areas or not. And I think people would rightly want to know whether or not the government will guarantee that those hospital beds won't be closed, and that the DHAs, as they continue to look at ways to manage within the envelope they're being given, won't go looking in that direction. So I'd like to put that to you. I'd like to know whether those small number of beds that were identified in some of those smaller facilities, whether the residents in those communities can feel secure that those beds will not close in this fiscal year.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, the first question relative to the expansion of the facilities, I believe we anticipate, we're now in the planning process, and we anticipate completion of construction in the, not in this fiscal year, but in the fiscal year that would follow this year. So there is a significant period of time when that construction will be underway, and of course then to outfit and gear up the facility. So we would anticipate that it will be operational in 05-06. The other issue that's raised by the honourable member is one that came about as a result of a FOIPOP by one of the daily newspapers, and they asked for the occupancy rates of hospitals throughout the province, and the ones that made it to the press were obviously those that had low occupancy rates. And the questions that flowed out of that: does that mean that because the bed occupancy rate is only 30% that you're going to decide to close that facility? I want to come back and address this, but if the honourable member would permit me, I'd like to relate some experiences I've had in meetings with the district health authorities as I went around the province. And I noted with interest that in some of them, in describing their roles, would begin with a description of a facility, and then it would have a number of beds in that facility, and under that would be a list, and many of them very impressive lists, of what services are provided in conjunction with each of those facilities. And the question that I started to ask the folks in the DHAs is the description of the facility and the number of beds what is important, or is the description of the services that are provided by the DHA in those communities what should be important. And as the discussion evolved, it very clearly focused on the services that are provided in those communities. But it pointed out to me that if we are going to fundamentally deal with the funding issue that confronts us with respect to health care, and that is that this escalating cost year after year, the increases, that one of the things we better start focusing on is the service that we provide and how we provide the service. Because if we continue to measure health care solely on the basis of the number of beds that are there, I'm afraid that we're not really doing a good job of communicating to our citizens that which is important about health care. And I felt that that particular FOIPOP and the story that flowed from it was not helpful to promoting the need for us to focus on services relative to health care rather than focusing on the issue of beds. Because the hospital in Antigonish, the honorable member be familiar with that, when that was built in the just around 86, I think it opened, it was built as a 175-bed facility. There are now, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of 77 or 78 beds in that facility, 100-bed difference. The community does not feel that difference relative to healthcare because how we deliver that healthcare has changed dramatically over the period of the past 20 years. And as a result, we don't need the same number of beds. But the services that we provide are enhanced, in my view, compared to what they were 20 years ago. So I believe it would be helpful if all of us really, not just government or people within the Department of Health, but if our society really started to focus on services that are being provided within our communities rather than on the number of beds, because clearly the number of beds, if there's an occupancy rate of 30% relative to beds, is not a clear indication of the health care that's being provided within those communities. So to come back to answer your question, the commitment that I want to make is that the services that our citizens are receiving through these facilities, and in some instances those services are not necessarily housed in a facility, they can be in rented space downtown or rented space in the community or the village or wherever, but that the service that's provided will be maintained and hopefully enhanced. Now, in order to do that, and this is part of some of the fundamental reform that needs to take place relative to the delivery of health care, we need to be prepared to accept that perhaps our doctors need to think in terms, and we as a society need to think in terms of our doctors doing less and others in the healthcare delivery system do more, so that we get better use of our physicians than currently is the case, and that those who have skills are fully employ the skills that they have in order to provide the services. So that requires, some changes. I think the challenge that faces a lot of us in terms of achieving those objectives are significant, because as long as our citizens respond to headlines about beds, then we're not leading the way relative to the fundamental changes that have to take place in the delivery of health care. Indeed, I welcome the opportunity to go to Ottawa and to talk about this, because it's not just a Nova Scotia challenge. It's a challenge that exists right across the country. And we need, all of us, to impress upon our citizens, because let's face it, most citizens don't significantly think about health care until they reach the point where they actually need it. And you know, the Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works is a long time from ever really being in a position where he'll need that service of our healthcare system, at least the way he moves around here, if there's any evidence of that. But we have a very significant challenge, and I think the Honourable Member in her question points to that challenge, points to the need for us to be engaged in the discussions relative to reform, but it also points to the need for even the DHAs, when I had my discussions with them, to change their slides so that they put the services first in their communities, and the institution is really a secondary item relative to that in terms of importance and in terms of the health of the people in those communities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The Honourable Member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank the Minister. I did not hear a commitment to keep those beds in those communities. However, your point is taken. I mean, I do understand the distinction between services and beds and the debate that's been around in the healthcare system for a while. And it's an important one, but I think, you know, sometimes a bed is a service that's required, or it goes with the important service that's required. And I think the other thing that is a real challenge in terms of having this discussion is that, you know, hospital beds have closed and the services didn't necessarily follow. And for a lot of communities, that's a real concern. If they see services that once were available in their local area, and now they have to travel long periods of time for that, or in fact they get no services at all. And so this is a very, I think this will continue to be a debate, no doubt, tied to the question of beds and services and what comes first and where. I want to ask the Minister some questions about wait times for diagnostic services. In the health estimates, one of the things that I've noticed is, this is in the supplementary detail, there's on page 12.21, under capital grants, the diagnostic and medical equipment line item indicates that there was an estimate of $15 million for diagnostic and medical equipment for this year, yet less than $4.5 million has been spent. This is puzzling, to say the least. I couldn't quite understand how it could be, particularly when we know that the wait times for diagnostic services are extensive in many, many areas. So there are a number of questions I have with respect to diagnostic wait times, but I'd like to start first by asking the Minister, why is there such a large discrepancy between what was estimated for diagnostic and medical equipment and what is forecast to be spent?
I want to thank the honourable member for her question, and indeed, what she is speaking about is that there is a process relative to the expenditure of this money, and the first step in the process is for the request from the DHAs to receive approval, and once approval is received, then they're in a position to go out and purchase the equipment that they need. It is not possible all of the time to be able to complete those purchases prior to the end of the fiscal year in question. So when that happens, that approved amount that remains unspent gets carried over into the next year. And so the estimate for 04-05 for that fund, for instance, is an amount of $25.757 million. And that is where that additional money would go and how it would show up.
The honourable member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So then that brings me to some questions about wait times and the government's plan to decrease or shorten wait times, particularly, well, I'll start with just getting diagnostic services. I know that there is the working group on reducing wait times. However, I'm not aware that there is an actual plan. So I want to ask the Minister whether the department is keeping records, keeping an accurate account of what the waiting times are for diagnostic services around the province in the various DHAs, whether that's an area that the DHAs report to you. If it isn't, is it part of your plan to make that something that needs to be developed in order to develop a plan, a timely plan to decrease wait time? So I'd like if the Minister would speak to the whole question of what the plan is to reduce wait times for diagnostic services, and how much resources are being allocated in this fiscal year to decreasing wait times.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The issue of wait times involves activity on a number of fronts, and it's all related to planning that is in place. And if I might use as an example the situation with respect to the emergency room and Capital Health, the fact that in a matter of, I think, less than 10 days, Capital Health and the Department of Health were able to come forward with a 10-point plan is not something that was cobbled together in a 10-day period. There, in fact, was in effect a planning process. Now, one of the lessons that might be learned from that is that perhaps a better job could have been done relative to sharing the planning process with people involved in the front line, so that they might have had the assurance that all of this was being addressed. With respect to wait times, we have made, we invested in previous year the $5 million with respect to the cath lab at the QE2. That has resulted in wait times coming down to normal numbers with respect to cardiac procedures. We have this year announced an additional amount of money to address wait times with respect to orthopedic surgery, both at Capital Health, the opening of an OR facility and additional beds at Capital Health, plus an additional orthopedic surgeon at New Glasgow. And that, of course, will go a long way to bringing us in line with national standards. That's not to say that that is going to happen overnight, but it will start. Will start to relieve pressure in that regard. One of the challenges, the real challenges with respect to the issue of wait times, is for everyone to understand what is meant by a wait time of a given period of time, so that there is a consistency and everyone understands what we mean when we say that there is a wait time of 4 months or there is a wait time of 5 months. And that is not achieved easily, but it is part of what we're attempting to do in the coming year with respect to the investment we've made of $465,000 on the wait time initiative. So while we are developing long-range processes and plans to address wait times, we're not waiting to implement it all at the end of the process. We're implementing as we can and as we obviously can recognize pressures that have to be addressed in the shorter term. So it is a process that brings us to a much better understanding. And as I said in my opening remarks, I believe that when we go and meet with the federal government later this summer, that in this province we'll be able to present ourselves as leaders relative to this process. And that is as a result of the planning, the understanding that exists within the department and with the DHAs for us to develop a consistency and for us to address priorities relative to the planning process. And I indeed look forward to that discussion on a national basis, because I believe we'll be able to make a very significant contribution to it. Thank you.
The honourable member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Well, I know that that certainly I had seen some of the research that Dr. Dunbar and his colleagues have been doing around orthopedic wait times, and had an opportunity to be at a presentation that he and his colleagues did, and have had an opportunity to talk to them as well. And they have, they have a lot of expertise in terms of setting up the research to track and gather the information. So it doesn't surprise me, I suppose, on one level, that there are some areas where we have a real advantage because of the expertise that exists in our medical school and in our medical research community. But I'm wondering if the minister could detail for us how the $465,000 for the wait time initiative will be spent. What specifically will those resources be allocated to, and what will it get us? Where will it get us at the end of the expenditure of these particular resources?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I want to thank the honourable member, Madam Chair, and I appreciate her patience. Sometimes when you're in this process, you receive information that's designed to be helpful to you. Usually, it arrives after you've sat down, and however, I was content with the fact that I did cover most of the points I should have in the previous question. But at any rate, the objective of the Wait Times Initiative is, first of all, to get a standardized measure that's clearly understood by all participants in the process, from the specialist to the family doctor, to the patient, to those involved in the diagnostic procedures, so that everyone understands what we're dealing with. And we need to establish a database with that information. So with that database, then people can get a clearer picture of what's going on in the province, and then people can see where wait times are perhaps longer than they are in some situations, shorter in others, so that there is some choice that people would have relative to that. And we also, it will give us the opportunity of having performance measures relative to how we're doing, so that we can, in fact, measure it on a consistent basis. And the measure will mean something to everybody that's involved, rather than the measure meaning one thing to the family doctor, something else to the specialist, meaning something else to the diagnostician, and being just nothing but a big question mark to the patient sometimes. So we need to get that performance measures underway. Now, obviously what we want to achieve are in the following key areas: the surgical services, and we've made a start, are beginning with that with respect to orthopedics, and it's not just a start; it's a very significant step forward. Diagnostics with MRI and CT and genetic testing. Okay? Those are matters that are going to be addressed in this process. And then there's the question of the general practitioner's referral to gastroenterologists, plastic surgery, and medical oncology. These are the areas that they will be focusing their attention on. And once they have completed those areas, then they will move to others. But these are the areas that are considered to be priorities, and that there is a need for a standardized measure so that there can be a performance analysis done, and so that people will understand when they see a number precisely what that number means, and all participants would understand the meaning of that. So that is it's a significant initiative in order to be able to put all of that together. But without doing that, we're really not in a position to plan properly where we should be going as we move forward.
The Honourable Member from Halifax Needham.
Oh, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the minister. That is quite that is helpful to have that level of detail. I'm wondering if the minister could give us some information about wait times for MRIs. Is that something that the department already has some knowledge of? And I ask this specifically because this is probably the technology or the diagnostic service you hear the most about. And I know that the Capital District had released a bit of a report, I think, a report card of some kind, where they indicated that the wait times for MRIs had actually decreased because they had added additional staff, and were running the MRI for a longer period of time, and that meant if they had the ability to reduce wait time. So I'm wondering if the department has looked at that, has looked at the wait list for MRIs, and whether we have a sense that we are making some progress, even though it is part of this this larger wait time initiative, and probably the outcome still province-wide, probably not known. But what about here in the Capital District?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question, and perhaps some specific numbers relative to her question will show up while I'm on my feet, and maybe they won't. In the event that they don't, I'll make sure that they're made available to her. But I can tell you it's a number that we're very pleased with, and I'm surprised at myself that I'm not able to spout it off, because it's not often you get those opportunities. But we have moved, and it's because we now have four pieces of equipment around the province, and we're getting a much better use and sharing of the facilities between Capital Health and the IWK. In terms of the use of the facilities there, and of course with the opening of Sydney, that has made a huge difference. There's upwards of, I believe, 100 patients a week that used to come in this direction who no longer. And we're out of time on this element.
The Honourable Member from Cape Breton West on introduction.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I take great pleasure in introducing to you and through you to all members of the committee two very distinguished Nova Scotians. Miss Betty Boudreau, who, by the way, is treasurer of the Nova Scotia Women's Liberals Commission, and also Greta Murdoch, who is a retired school teacher. Greta is well known throughout the Halifax region. She was very active in political life as well, but also very active in Acadian affairs and promoting the French culture during her teaching profession. And I think, given the fact that this is a rather special year for the Acadian culture, I think it's quite appropriate that we introduce such very distinguished Nova Scotians as Ms. Murdoch and, of course, Ms. Boudreau. So I would ask if both members or individuals would rise and receive the warm welcome of the committee.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I must say before I ask the Minister some questions here that I found it absolutely amazing that after an hour of talking on the healthcare system that the member for Halifax Needham would agree with the Minister of Health that there's no problem in healthcare in Nova Scotia. We have no real concerns. Everything is rosy. Everything is great, according to the member for Halifax Needham and the health minister, who say the only problem with the healthcare system is the member for Glace Bay. So, Madam Chair, I find that absolutely amazing when the member for Halifax Needham was asking about wait times and elective surgeries and wait lists and so on. If there's no problem, how do those lists even exist, Madam Chair? How do they even exist if there's no problems in healthcare in this province? And why not just take our heads out of the sand, as the minister should be doing, and admit that there's a problem with no plan and get around to finally solving the problems that face healthcare, instead of trying to play some silly little political game with the members of the NDP, Madam Chair. Why not get down to the real task at hand and face up to the problems and try and find some solutions, Madam Chair, would be my suggestion for the Minister. Now, Madam Chair, I would suggest that I'm going to skip around a little bit in our estimates book here and try and get to the bottom of a few things, but let's start out on page 1212 of the supplementary detail book. On page 1212, and the Cancer Care Nova Scotia budget, which you will see on line 3, has been basically flatlined. There's no increase in the cancer care budget, and I'd like to give the Minister of Health an opportunity to explain to us why there has not been an increase in the cancer care budget.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question, Madam Chair, and it's important that all members of the committee understand the role of Cancer Care Nova Scotia. Its role is as a body to set standards relative to the provision of care for the treatment of cancer in the province. And as such, while in every facet of healthcare we would like to be able to provide additional dollars, we're not always able to do that. But we should understand that Cancer Care Nova Scotia and its budget is not indicative of the amount of money that is being spent on the treatment of cancer within this province. And if we look at some of the results of the past period of time, you can look at the urgent cancer care wait times in Capital Health decreased from 14 to 9 days, Madam Chair. And the next urgent cases wait time decreased from 26 to 18 days. And less urgent case wait times decreased from 55 to 28 days. Now, that's not to suggest that we in any way are satisfied with the fact that there are wait times of 9 days or wait times of 18 days or indeed wait times of 28 days. We would like to be with a system where, in fact, people could receive treatment almost immediately. We're not going to be there. We will be able to reduce wait times and get them down even further. But it's quite interesting that the honourable member makes the suggestion that perhaps not enough money is being spent. And he also, on a previous occasion during this examination of the estimates, suggested that somehow we should not have been urging Ottawa to put more money toward health care in this province without there being a detailed plan. Now, I don't take any issue, and I said it just recently, that we look forward to the planning process relative to the provision of health care, and we look forward to the planning process with respect to how we would organize ourselves to provide health care into the future. But to suggest that there aren't current needs that require additional expenditures of money is not an accurate reflection of the situation that confronts us. And Madam Chair, if you were to look at an expenditure by the Government of Canada on a per capita basis relative to health care from the period of 1993 to the period of 2002-2003, you will see that that is a flat line. There has been no increase on a per capita basis of the Government of Canada with respect to the delivery of health care. On the other hand, if you look at the per capita expenditure of Nova Scotia money and the per capita expenditure on healthcare within this province, it goes from a figure of just under $1,500 in 93-94 to a figure of approximately $2,300 in 02-03. Now, while that huge increase has taken place with respect to the expenditure of healthcare in this province, the federal government's amount of money has remained flatlined. Now, the other bit of evidence that I could point to with respect to the issue of whether it is reasonable for us to expect Ottawa to make additional contributions to healthcare in this province is to consider where we have been just from last year to this year relative to to Ottawa's expenditure on healthcare. And the amount that they provided, okay, has not changed from last year to this year. There has been a shuffling of the chairs on the deck, but the amount of money that's coming is the same last year as it was this year. Even with the $60 million that supposedly they injected into the system in this fiscal year, all that did was bring it back up to $105 million that we received additional last year. So that amount of money is flatlined. It remains the same. It doesn't change. So the honourable member asks me for a commitment that any money that we receive from Ottawa will in fact go to health care. Then when you consider that we haven't received any additional money from Ottawa from last year to this year, and we have increased the expenditure of health care in this budget by an amount of $230 million, then I would suggest, Madam Chair, that Ottawa would have to increase its contribution by as much as $230 million to health care in this province before we would have to deal with the issue as to whether all of the money that came from Ottawa went to health care, because they gave us nothing extra this year and we injected an additional $230 million into health care this year. So that's really the issue that's at play here, is the fact that that there isn't additional money from Ottawa, and there is additional money from this province by an amount of $230 million for health care for the citizens of this province.
The honourable member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, it's the same one-note song that we're hearing from the minister all the time. Ottawa, 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 Ottawa. What I asked the minister was why there's no increase in the cancer care budget. And it clearly shows, if you look at line 3, again on page 1212, that from what you actually spent in 2003 to what you're forecasting in this year remains exactly the same. In the meantime, 5,200 people will be newly diagnosed with cancer in Nova Scotia, and 2,500 of them will die as a result of cancer this year alone. But yet, what happens if you don't reduce wait times for cancer care because you flatlined the budget? Now, if the minister has had any representations made to him on behalf of Cancer Care in Nova Scotia, then I'm certain that those representations did not include a suggestion that you flatline the budget. I'm sure Cancer Care in Nova Scotia didn't say to the minister, if he met with them, we don't want any more money. Look at the statistics regarding cancer. And given that you would have presumably had the benefit of a meeting with Cancer Care in Nova Scotia, I'm asking you what initiatives are on hold as a result, then, of this budget flatlining. And I'm asking that because the minister did not answer why there was no increase, but if there is no increase, and it's quite obvious, it's in black and white, the figures are there, then what initiatives are on hold because there is no increase?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Perhaps I will try and explain a little more the distinction that I was making with respect to the setting of standards, which is the responsibility of Cancer Care in Nova Scotia, and the treatment of cancer, which is something that is funded through the district health authorities in this province. So there are no initiatives that are on hold as such with respect to Cancer Care in Nova Scotia. The standards that they are implementing are standards that are having an impact right across the province. They will continue to implement those standards. And there have been very real progress with respect to the cancer patient navigation programs that are being implemented throughout the province. So, Madam Chair, to suggest that because the budget for Cancer Care in Nova Scotia has been flatlined translates into some sort of lack of funding with respect to the care of cancer is not accurate, and I want to draw that distinction because the district health authorities, in fact, have the money that's dedicated to the treatment of cancer in this province.
The honourable member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm sure the minister knows Cancer Care in Nova Scotia is a program of the Department of Health. And it's created to reduce the burden of cancer on individuals and on families and the healthcare system through the prevention, screening, education, and research. Now, again, Madam Chair, I'll ask the minister, what additional work can be done on, let's say, for instance, on the screening front by Cancer Care Nova Scotia, if the budget, as it is flatlined? What about prevention? Can Cancer Care Nova Scotia do any more work on prevention if there hasn't been an increase in their budget? And Madam Chair, what type of message is this government sending to cancer patients and their families in this province if Cancer Care Nova Scotia program that has done so much to help patients has not seen one more red cent in terms of a budget increase? So I'd like the minister to answer, what kind of message is that sending to Nova Scotia cancer patients, their families, when they haven't seen 1 cent increase in their budget, Mr. Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The program to which the honourable member refers is a program that Cancer Care in Nova Scotia is working with the Office of Health Promotion on. So, and the honourable member may wish to pursue this further with the Minister of Health Promotion when his estimates are brought forward. But what needs to be understood is that with the additional resources that are being put in place for the Office of Health Promotion, and the Office of Health Promotion working together with Cancer Care in Nova Scotia, that indeed there is the capacity to do additional work relative to the mandate of Cancer Care in Nova Scotia and the Office of Health Promotion.
The honourable member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll change subjects, number one, because I haven't received an answer yet. Certainly I'll pursue it with the Minister of Health Promotion. But again, it leaves a lot of questions unanswered for cancer patients and their families in this province. Let me switch to the topic of continuing care, Madam Chair. And on page 12.6 of the supplementary detail, continuing care administration, which has increased by over $1.6 million. And I'd like to ask the minister why such a large increase?
The
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The number that the member is referring to reflects a transfer money from the program side to administration side of that particular of home care. So there isn't, it's simply being accounted for in a different place compared to what it had been previously.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you look at page 1212 of the main estimates, page 1212, it states that the salaries and benefits for continuing care are increasing by about $475,000, which accounts for a lion's share of the increase there. When you look at page 1222, and you see there an increase of funded staff, the budget says there will be an increase of 4 staff people. And when you divide that 4, if I'm doing my calculations correct here, if you divide 4 staff people into $475,000, and assuming that it's going towards their salaries, then you get an average of salary per new staff person of about $118,000, just over $118,000, about $750, which would amount to a lot of pretty high paid help. So, Madam Chair, I'll ask the Minister, what exactly are those staff people going to be doing? And indeed, is that their salary, Mr. Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The actual number of employees involved is 6 and not 4, and that number includes not just the salary, but the benefits that go with it, and the expenses related to the activities of those employees as well. So you can't do a straight division and come up with a number. It's a combination of salary, benefit, and expenses related to those positions.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank the Minister for that clarification. At the same time that the salaries and benefits are increased, the grants and contributions are reduced to 0. So you completely eliminate grants and contributions. So my question to the Minister would be, what grants and what contributions are being eliminated?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, it's a situation not of something being eliminated, but of being transferred, and they're again transferred to administration?
To the program.
To the program delivery, as opposed to where it had existed previously.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to change topics here now and talk about the children's dental program. If you look at page 1210, I do believe, if I'm correct, yeah, page 1210 of the children's dental program, one can see that the budget last year, according to my calculations, was underspent by some $900,000 on the children's dental program. And I'd like to know from the Minister, why was that program underspent?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The member is quite correct to take note of a figure like that, because it does make an impression when you look at it at first glance. Actually, the situation that's reflected in that number is related to the take-up on the program itself, and that has decreased. And as a result, the amount of money that was actually expended was less than that which was estimated.
The honourable member from Glace Bay.
Madam Chair, as I recall, in the 2002 budget, there were some changes made by government to the children's dental program as a cost-saving measure, they said at the time. And then in October of that same year, they were retracted. So when the retraction took place, the children's dental program went from $2.9 million to $4.6 million, which is over budget by about $1.7 million. So this year, as the minister said, the budget is underspent. In fact, less is expected to be spent in 03-04 than in 2002 and 2003. So I'll ask again for a clarification from the minister. Perhaps he could explain what changes have been made that would allow such a drastic reduction there.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Madam Chair, there are no changes to the program. What has changed are the number of people taking advantage of the program. That has decreased.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, let me switch topics here and go to the question of District Health Authority funding. And I'll refer the Minister to pages 12.13 and 12.18. On the budget day, the government was boasting about $78.5 million extra going into District Health Authority funding. And in reality, Madam Chair, the increase amounts to about $21 million, I would suggest. When you take the estimate for 2004 and 5 and compare those numbers with the forecast, which is where the DHAs expect to be by the end of the year, then you end up with an increase of only $21 million and not $78 million, as the minister and this government keeps saying. So my question for the minister is this $21 million enough additional funding for district health authorities?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I need to point out, and I hope staff will listen carefully to make sure that what I'm saying is completely accurate. But what I need to point out is that there was a transfer of $15 million that previously had been charged to Capital District Health Authority for the services of physicians who were employed in the medical school and at Capital Health in the teaching program. And that money was transferred out of the Capital Health to the medical payments file. And as a result, it would appear to have reduced the funding for Capital Health by an amount of $15 million, but in effect, they have the benefit of that $15 million as a result of not being responsible for its expenditures. So it's a net effect of $37 million positive for the DHAs.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Madam Chair, I'm going to ask the Minister for some more clarification there, if he doesn't mind. I think last year we indicated that there was no way that the amount budgeted would be enough for the district health authorities. And when the numbers were all said and done, and you compare the estimate to the forecast figures for 2003 and 4, it looks like the DHAs will actually be over budget by some $57 million. So I'll ask the Minister then, how is it possible that with an increase of $21 million, that what you're providing to district health authorities this year, how is it possible that that will be enough?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
No, I don't think it's a question, Madam Chair, of anybody being wrong. It's a question of sort of understanding where the dollars are. The health authorities on the budget will be to the benefit of about $37 million as a result of the transfer of the medical payments, or transfer to medical payments out of the Capital District. And the honourable member, in referencing the apparent over expenditure of the DHAs, will recall that in the early fall, the DHAs identified areas of concern that they had with respect to their funding, which government examined and responded to in a positive way. The honourable member will recall that as a result of oncology costs and as a result of overtime expenditures, there was a pressure of an additional $19.2 million for the DHAs. In addition to that, there was an amount of $15 million which is transferred from the Department of Health to the DHAs and the IWK. And some of those items, Madam Chair, are biomedical waste, mental health, Veterans Affairs Canada, additional therapists for early identification and intervention, and services for children with autism, and operating dollars for the bone densitometer for DHAs 2 and 4. So that $15 million figure was there. In addition to that, there are the increase in benefits for healthcare workers, which were transferred to the DHAs and the IWK, and we allowed for a $9.9 million figure for that amount of money. So when the honourable member notes that they will appear as being overexpended, it's because of those adjustments that were made to assist the DHAs in meeting those pressures. In addition to that, that money was not just added on a one-time basis. That money was added to the base, so that the 7% increase that the DHAs received this year is based on that money being added to the base. And so that's the explanation for that change.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me ask the Minister then, have the what business plans, have the business plans been approved to date right now? Could he outline exactly what business plans have been approved?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're dealing with a situation that is in process. I can say that I believe eight business plans are that far from being released and say that they are approved, but there are still 2 final steps in the process before we can say that they are approved definitely, and I'm going to wait until those steps have been completed before we get into the process of identification. And I can tell you that that is very close, and I would anticipate 8 of those business plans would probably come forward before, certainly before the budget comes forward for final approval. Much before that, I would anticipate, but I don't want to. I want to allow room for any catch that might come along in the process. I don't anticipate any, but I would expect it will be very soon when we'll be able to make those announcements.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I asked the Minister how many business plans have been approved, and the Minister says that X number of business plans are this close to being approved, then I would suggest that the answer is that there are no business plans that are approved as of right now. That not officially. There are no business plans approved. Yes, well, right now, as we speak, no business plans have been approved for DHAs. And part of the problem with this year's forecasted amounts for district health authorities, which in the case of all DHAs are more than what was budgeted for last year, is because of how long it took for this government to approve the business plans last year. And I'm sure the minister will admit that it took a very long time last year to approve district health authorities' business plans. In some cases, they were over a year before they actually got their business plans approved. So let me ask the minister, do you believe that the additional $21 million will cause some problems in that business planning process for DHAs? Do you see any problems there? I'll just say the additional $21 million. We have an ongoing dispute here whether it's $21 million or $76 million, as you're saying, will cause some problems in the business planning process for DHAs. And at the same time, you're telling me that perhaps by come the time that we vote on the budget here, that district health authorities will have their business plans approved?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Madam Chair, just to be as clear as I can be, the department has provided its approval, or at the executive director level, senior staff have provided their approval for 8 of the DHA budgets. 2 of the budgets are still under more detailed discussion at this stage, and I would not, when I made reference to the time we get to voting, that I was referencing the 8 DHAs that have been approved departmentally will come forward. I'm not going to, while we'll do our very best to ensure that the approval process moves along as quickly as possible, I would not want to, the member to feel that I was talking about the remaining 2 that are currently under discussion when I said that. I was talking about the 8. And it's really, in my view, at this stage, simply a matter of procedure to get from departmental approval to the final approval process. I can tell the honourable member that the DHAs are back refining the documents themselves to ensure that they reflect everything that's going on. And if the honourable member had difficulty hearing that, I don't mind repeating it at all. But at any rate, the process is much advanced in relation to last year. I might, well, anyway, I'll leave it at that. It's much advanced in relation to last year.
The Honourable Member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On September 19th of 2003, the government issued a press release that stated that district health authorities are going to receive an additional $19.2 million for costs associated with nursing. Now, Madam Chair, I would conclude from that commitment that the extra funding would be allocated towards acute care. And I'm assuming that the minister will agree with that assumption. So when you compare the estimate from last year to the forecast, then district health authorities in the acute care area are over budget by over $51 million. If that's the case, then, Madam Chair, I would suggest that something has gone drastically wrong. Either district health authorities did not have enough funding to start with, or the plan for health care is so out of whack that the entire acute care sector is on the verge of collapse. So, Madam Chair, if you have appropriate home care services, if you don't have them, what happens is that acute care gets stretched to the limit. And if long-term care patients are staying in acute care beds, then your system gets backlogged and acute care budgets of district health authorities go out of control. So perhaps, Madam Chair, despite what the government is saying, and the minister can answer this question, perhaps there are not enough nurses in the system. Perhaps the acute care budget and the tremendous overrun can be attributed to overtime costs, or what is it? So let me ask the minister, Madam Chair, what exactly seems to be the problem there, Mr. Minister?
There is, in fact, an additional $42 million going into the DHAs as a result of last year. I would point out to the honourable member and to members of the House that with respect to the business planning process of DHAs, last year we were into our third year of that business planning process. Now, to suggest that we would embark upon a new relationship with respect to the delivery of health care in the province as administered by the district health authorities, that we could overcome all and every possible difficulty in a 2-year period, I would suggest is perhaps not realistic. I think what's important is that in the course of last year, when the district health authorities identified shortcomings in the business plans that were presented as a result of circumstances that came to the fore throughout the course of their year, then the government's response to providing additional money in the sum of $47 million is something that is to the credit not just of the DHAs, but of the government itself, and of the relationship that exists between the Department of Health and the district health authorities, that there is such a strong working relationship between the district health authorities and the Department of Health with the support of government, that they were able to address and resolve these problems that arose in the course of the year. So it is a major step forward, in my view, with respect to the maturing of the district health authorities, the capacity of the Department of Health to work with them to recognize real problems and address those real problems by convincing government of the need to do so. I would contend that we have made great progress in the relationship between the district health authorities and the Department of Health and government over the course of the past year, and we look forward to the coming business plans being even more reflective of the reality that exists in the healthcare delivery sphere, and that we would, in a very significant way, diminish and anticipate any future problems that may be encountered. So we have confidence that the numbers that we are presenting in the budget are numbers that will, based on our anticipation of the needs of the district health authorities, be sufficient to meet those needs. That does not mean that that it is simply a sit down and stamp of approval with respect to the business plans. There is a process. There needs to be, first of all, an understanding of what it is that is being funded through the district health authorities, and there needs to be a very real justification of that funding. And there needs also to be an opportunity for the district health authorities to state their case relative to government's anticipated funding needs related to the district health authorities. So the short answer to the question is We are confident with the numbers we've presented. The longer answer is in order to explain that there is a maturing process that is taking place in the relationship between the DHAs, the Department of Health, and government. Thank you, Madam Chair.
The honourable member from Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me say this. Even with an extra $19.2 million that was allocated last fall, then the acute care for DHAs is still over budget by some $32 million. And in that press release last fall, it was indicated by the minister that $19.2 million came with strings attached, and one of the strings was that DHAs would end the year without a deficit. So, Madam Chair, Mr. Minister, I draw your attention to what appears to be deficits for the district health authorities. For South Shore DHA, $2.3 million. For Southwest Nova DHA, close to $2.9 million. For Annapolis Valley DHA, close to $4.5 million. Colchester East Hants DHA, about $2.8 million. Cumberland Health Authority, $1.68 million. Pictou County DHA, $2.46 million. Guysborough Antigonish Strait DHA, $2.2 million. Cape Breton DHA, $7.5 million. Capital District, over $22 million. And the IWK, just over $8.7 million. Now, Madam Chair, DHAs are expected to pick up the deficit, and then what you provide them in terms of extra funding for the fiscal year, it won't even cover their deficits. So what you provided, Madam Chair, is in no way, shape, or form in any, even whatever kind of thinking you come up with, would not reduce wait times. What you have provided won't even begin to cover about a $57 million in deficits, and what you have provided is a negative growth health budget. How can district health authorities be expected to manage, Madam Chair? And how is it possible that the minister and his government can claim that they have a balanced budget when district health authorities in this province are some $57 million over budget? How is that possible, Madam Chair? So what we have found again is a minister who is basically trying to justify no plan. We have absolutely no plan whatsoever for health care. We have no plan for district health authorities either.
Time allotted has expired. The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Yes, Madam Chair, I move that your committee do now rise and report considerable progress and beg leave to sit again on a future date, future time.
Chairman of the committee reports.
Committee's met, made progress, begs leave to sit again.
Agreed? Agreed. Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business public bills second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call bill number 48, the Education Act?
Bill number 48. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we take a look at Bill 48, certainly at first read, the idea of opening up the schools the public schools of the province to greater use, greater participation by the wider community, and especially in conjunction with what we heard last week, a renewed emphasis on health promotion. Certainly the two certainly go hand in hand. However, as we take a look further at this bill, there's certainly a number of questions that come to mind. Is this bill going to mean the absolute control of the schools? In other words, the minister will be designating what groups, certainly beyond school and youth groups, that will be able to come into the schools. So that certainly potentially has a great limiting impact at a time when we do want our schools to once again to reflect what are the strong values of our community schools, and especially in rural Nova Scotia. Certainly over the past number of years, we have moved from a time when our schools were very, very open to all groups in the community, to now a time when they are much more restricted. Restricted by the fact that we have to have agreements with these groups, insurance coverage, and obviously fees have to be collected, contracts have to be signed. So it has been an inhibiting factor for these groups to come in to the school. And in our rural part of rural Nova Scotia, we certainly don't have the YMCA facilities. We don't have community clubs and gyms and organizations and places for our youth, and in fact a wide range of groups to use our schools. So as we start to take a look then at this bill, certainly that is one of the questions then that comes to mind. Will there be a very restrictive list of groups that will be permitted to use the facilities? And especially since if we're going to have no fees charged to our youth and school groups, then will other groups who will come into the school, will they have to offset those kinds of costs? There will always be in our schools janitorial costs. There will be the lights, the heat, the maintenance, that whole area that will need to be made up in one manner or another. So I do have a number of reservations, and our caucus have a number of reservations then as to what the true intent of this bill really is. And I think it is certainly going to need some exploration in law amendments to have groups come in and give their views on perhaps what the intent of the legislation is. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would have to say that the hope is that it would go to law amendments and have groups explore this piece of legislation much further.
Thank you. The honourable member for Victoria Lakes on the introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the West Gallery, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Mr. Leslie McKinnon and Mr. Kevin Sangster from Cole Harbour, and good Liberal supporters, Mr. Speaker. So I would like to have the House give them. I'd like to have the House give them a rounding welcome of applause, Mr. Speaker.
Welcome our guests to Gallery 8. Hope they enjoy the proceedings. Order, please. Honourable Member Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome our guests in the gallery. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've been an MLA for 6 years, and I have to say that when I'm out and about in my constituency, my constituents ask me, how I like the work and so on, and I tell them that I'm not a cynic, that I recognize that it is possible to make change in this province, even though I haven't recognized much of it from the previous two parties. But I want to say that for sure I believe that it is possible to use the power of government to improve people's lives. So, if there's been anything that may have pushed me a bit towards cynicism, it's this bill that's before us today, Bill 48. And the reason for that, Mr. Speaker, or the reasons are this. This bill, which on the face of it would appear to be relatively innocuous, that you tend to think it's actually a very good intention, I think, by the minister, but there's something about this bill that I find particularly confusing, Mr. Speaker. And the bill is actually a law to allow the Minister of Education to bring in a policy. Now, he is the minister. He's the minister. The minister can bring in policy. Ta-da! I mean, you know, that's not. It finally occurred to me, Mr. Speaker, the minister has the power already to write policy for the Department of Education. So there has to be something more to this than meets the eye. If the minister is having a policy written, that would be illegal to break it. Now, we can think that maybe some school boards might not act according to policy in some cases, and the minister could rap them on the knuckles. The minister could ask them if they would bring themselves into line with the policy. There'd be some negotiation back and forth, and the school board could say, look, we have a little problem with this, and here's the reason why, and the minister would say, I agree, and so just keep working toward the policy. But I don't see that that's going to be the case with this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. I see this, there's a reason for this, and I'll tell you what I think the reason is. School boards in this province are required by law to balance their books. And it would seem to me that one thing that school boards have been forced to do in this province is really collect user fees. And this is something that the government has a habit of thrusting upon Nova Scotians in a variety of ways. And so this, to make school boards search for dollars is not necessarily new. And schools in particular, actually, if you're a parent and have been a parent in this province for any length of time, I mean, you know, you can go back to every chocolate bar campaign, everything you can think about. I can remember in high school the penny parade, trying to collect pennies to help pay for whatever initiatives the school wanted to do. So this is really no different. This is a much bigger scale that schools require funding, and people never regard actually how much that teachers spend out of their own pockets when it comes to going to school, bringing pens and pencils for their students. I bought paper to run my exams off on 2 or 3 occasions, and you know, my wife, Mr. Speaker, works for the federal government, and I'm sure if she walked into her office in the morning with paper and staples and pens, people would say, like, what's wrong with you? But when it comes to teachers and schools, they can supply any amount of material out of their own wallet, and people just take that as the norm. So the education system in this province has been subsidized for a good many years by communities above and beyond the taxes that they pay. So I have to say that on the face of it, Mr. Speaker, it appears to be quite sensible for the government to try to have a policy that would eliminate those fees for groups, nonprofit groups in the communities. And I know that some of them, certainly in my area, have been feeling the pinch. And so I guess for me as a member who actually has 3 of the 4 new schools in my area are all P3 schools, this is not going to address the issue of it's not going to address the issue of the fees that are charged by P3 schools. And I know the minister has indicated in this House that the conversations are still going on. They're negotiating with the proponents of those schools, and but I would say that if they've been doing that since 1999, I wouldn't be overly optimistic that there's going to be much change in the funding, and that P3 schools will milk their communities in whatever way they can in order to have access, if community groups want to access those facilities. And that's not something that was entirely clear, I think, when the Liberal government went down this road. This was sold as purely a way to finance much-needed schools, and but it didn't really make it clear that communities were not going to have access to those P3 schools the same way that they were going to have access to the more traditionally built school. So I applaud the government for its initiative to move away from the P3 structure. But I have to say that I'm worried about the minister's direction in this regard as far as this legislation is concerned. The fact that the minister already has the power to write policy that would apply to school boards, and in this case, it's a policy that becomes a law. And I only can think that in light of what had happened in New Brunswick around the elimination of school boards, lack of funding to boards, which this may result in, and their inability to balance their books, may give the government the in that it needs to eliminate elected boards in this province. And I think that would be a very dangerous step for them to go, although it's a road they have initially gone down in one part of this province, I would say, Mr. Speaker. So I didn't intend to speak long, Mr. Speaker, so with those comments, I'll be really interested to see this bill go on to law amendments and see what the public reaction to this is. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak on Bill 48, which amends the Education Act and allows that school boards, or actually prohibits school boards from charging fees under certain circumstances for the use of their facilities. Mr. Speaker, I have a number of questions about this bill, and I'll be very interested to hear people who come before the Law Amendments Committee to speak to this bill, because I think generally this is a good idea. One of the first things that I had to deal with as a member representing the north end of Halifax Needham, was in fact dealing with a situation where an elementary school in my community that had been used for a long time, the gym had been used for a long time by the Ward 5 Community Center for after school and evening and weekend.
The honourable member for Halifax Fairview has the floor.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The school in my community, which is an inner city school, one of the designated inner city schools here in the peninsula, had been used by the Ward 5 Community Center for programs with young people from the inner city, mostly basketball and recreational type programs. And lo and behold, unknown to them, the school board had instituted a policy to charge for the use of that facility, and they had received a bill for almost $1,000. And they were, to say the least, fairly shocked when this occurred. And as a small nonprofit organization, they certainly didn't have the money to deal with these fees. And I think you know, in that scenario, we were able to negotiate a situation where they didn't have to pay those fees because they had not been advised ahead of time. But nevertheless, they stopped using that facility because they couldn't afford anymore to use the facility. And that meant that a lot of young kids from the inner city were left without, you know, the recreational and the programs that had meant a lot to that community over a long number of years. So if that kind of scenario would be addressed by this act, then certainly it would be a welcome piece of legislation. I mean, I think, Mr. Speaker, this begs the question of who owns schools in our province, and who are the schools there for? And there's another school in my constituency that's currently dealing with this very question with respect to before, during, and after school program for the children of working parents. You know, throughout the HRM, there are quite a few schools that offer before school programs, after school programs, either in the school or at a facility close to the school. St. Stephen's School in the north end of Halifax that has seen a marked decline in its enrollment and therefore a utilization of the physical space that is dropping all the time. Parents in that community are having a heck of a time getting agreement from the principal and from the school board with respect to using that school to have the MCA come in and use that school to offer a program for children who have working parents. And this has been an ongoing issue of controversy, and I'm not clear when I look at the bill. I'm not clear whether or not the bill, in fact, would capture that situation. So I'll be looking for some clarification from the Minister of Education in terms of what is meant by other groups being designated by the minister besides community youth groups. Would we also be looking at children and programs for children in the school and programs that could be put into a school that isn't fully utilized that would ensure there is a good program, adequate supervised program with a recreational component before school and maybe after school programs as well as during the lunch hour. So with those few words on this bill, I will look for those answers from the minister, and I look forward to hear what people have to say in front of the Law Amendments Committee. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to have a few moments to speak on Bill number 48. It's a particular interest in my riding, Cole Harbour Eastern Passage, I think for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a suburban growing riding, not unlike those of Timberley Prospect or Hammond's Plains Upper Sackville or, even parts of the riding of Eastern Shore or riding of Preston, Mr. Speaker, where you have a lot of young families moving in. Facilities usually follow later. Development happens and then eventually you get facilities. But one of the facilities that are most demanded, of course, are schools, and schools not only for education, but after school as well and before school. And the problem is in our province, Mr. Speaker, is that we've had a difficult time being able to ensure that our children, and indeed all citizens, have access to these schools. I'm proud to say that in my riding, back before the pre-3 fiasco, there was a development of a school, Tallahassee Community School. And I believe it's only one of two in Nova Scotia, the other being in the member for Chester St. Margaret's. It's the Forest Glen, I think, school, Forest Heights. And they're both community schools. And the concept is that at one end of the school you have the school, the other end is usually a rec center or a facility that enables, the line is blurred. You wouldn't know where one ended and the other began. But it allows access to a school, a building, for more than just the regular times of the day, 9 to 3 or 8 to 2 or whatever, Mr. Speaker. And it worked very well. Unfortunately, the community has ballooned to 12 or 13,000 people, and that is no longer enough of a facility for what our community needs. But then we built a P3 school, the Eastern Passage Education Center, a very nice school, beautiful school, but at the same time, that gym sits empty. That field that is there, Mr. Speaker, sits empty. It's a crying shame to watch and see how this school, with fantastic facilities, cannot be used by its own community. Indeed, there are some discussions in the community that it's actually being used by people outside who can afford. Other communities outside of Eastern Passage come in and rent it because they have the ability to collect the fees better than Eastern Passage, and they've actually been utilizing it, while the community of Eastern Passage cannot because of the cost of having to rent these facilities. They're very high, to the point where it makes it prohibitive to be able to use them, whether you're playing basketball, badminton, whether you're using a maybe less athletic but more active program in the cafeteria, a soccer field, Mr. Speaker. These are all facilities that could be used in my community, and they're not being used. And Mr. Speaker, that is a crying shame. And this bill, Mr. Speaker, does not go far enough. It talks about eliminating the fees in schools that are not P3, but for P3 schools, it will not touch them, and we're going to be left with the same dilemma in our growing communities. Because let's be clear. Well, it will be a two-tier system, Mr. Speaker. It will be two-tier. It is now, to some extent, and it's not going to get any better. But, Mr. Speaker, the real issue is when we went through this growth in P3 schools in the late 90s, they were built predominantly in areas, two types of areas: rural consolidation, and those schools are going to be there for a long, long time. They're not going anywhere. Whether it be the schools in Pictou County or in Richmond County, those P3 schools are going to be there for a long time unless there's a sudden spurt of growth that's going to result in the need for a second school being built.
Please. Member Eastern Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So you have those places where those schools were built in rural communities as consolidated schools, and they're going to be there for generations probably. And those are P3 school. In many cases, the only school, the only one with decent facilities, and yet they're not going to be accessible to the community. On the flip side, you have the ones that were built in suburban Halifax, Dartmouth, ones built in Eastern Passage or in Beachville or in head of St. Margaret's Bay. Mr. Speaker, these places are growing, they're developing quickly, and we do not have the ability to ensure that they have the facilities they need as well. And as a result, our children are suffering. As a result, our communities are suffering. And I would like to see this bill address the issue of P3 schools. It can be done. I don't see the government having the will to do it, and that's unfortunate. And I would hope that in the end, whether it be the soccer fields, whether it be baseball fields, whether it be gym or cafeterias that can be used, that they be opened up as well. Because if not, we're going to create a two-tier system, Mr. Speaker, and that's a system that we don't support. I guess the other part that I want to bring up in my brief comments, Mr. Speaker, is with regard to the actual bill itself, not getting into the detail of the language, but a couple of things that concern me. I heard some school board members after this bill was introduced, Mr. Speaker, and they were talking, school board staff, not members, and they were talking about the fact that there are two fees. There's a fee for rental and there's a fee for, quote, monitoring or door opening or something like that. Custodial fee, Mr. Speaker. These fees, I got the sense from the spokesperson, at least for the Halifax Regional School Board, aren't going to be done away with. So even though this government is talking about eliminating fees for youth in youth groups in facilities, the fact is that I think the school boards are already looking at ways to levy fees. Call a rose, call it by another name, it's still a rose. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, that in this case, I think you've got school boards looking at a way to impose a fee that will go around this bill. So this bill has to be drafted in a way to ensure that if this government is serious about saying that this is supposed to be free access, then make sure it's free. No fees, no fee of any kind, no levy, no charge that can be imposed in some other way that will be used as a means to get around the collection of the fee that they are now not going to be able to collect if this bill is passed, Mr. Speaker. And I would hope that this government will look seriously at that. My second concern is exactly who is eligible for accepting and getting access to this. This government talks about regulation and policy. Well, you know what? I've been around this House long enough, Mr. Speaker, to know that I would like to see the bottom line before we pass this bill. Does it mean scouts? They're not actually working. They're not athletic necessarily. They may be doing crafts, or they may be doing other things. You could be talking about, Mr. Speaker, organizations that maybe that are more ad hoc. You see local ground hockey leagues that do a very good job of getting kids out and working with them, or basketball leagues that maybe aren't really organized, just a bunch of people getting together, renting the gym and fooling around. But Mr. Speaker, as a result, are they going to be able to access this? I don't know. according to this, it has to be a youth organization, and Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned as to what that means. I would hope this government would take the time to clarify. They quite frankly have been very conservative in the use of paper with this bill, since it's only 3 or 4 lines long. They could fill up the rest of the page maybe with a couple of definitions and a couple of issues that we'd like to see addressed, so that we know that this bill is going to address specifically what needs to be done in those schools, that all youth have access to this schools for free, no fees, and that it addresses P3 schools as well. And while we're at it, Mr. Speaker, seniors in our communities also need healthy living as well, and there's times that they can use these buildings in a way that maybe can't be utilized by others. And Mr. Speaker, I would encourage us to also look at how seniors may be able to access this as well. I understand that this is predominantly addressed to youth, but seniors can use these buildings as well, and I would hope that we'd be looking at that. And I look forward to hearing from Law Amendments organizations who have some comments on this, because, Mr. Speaker, this bill has a lot of work to do. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do know that you won't have to call order while I'm speaking, because I do know that the members in the Legislative Assembly will be rather attentive to what I have to say. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say to you that I'm speaking on Bill 48, educational facilities. And I want to say to this Legislative Assembly as well is that I'm absolutely aghast, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the fact that this bill does not address the issue of P3 schools. And I can only imagine what my colleague in Temberley Prospect, the honourable member for Temberley Prospect, must have to deal with, and also the member for Cape Breton Nova, who must have to deal with, because each of these members have a total of 5 P3 schools in their constituencies. 3, I believe, in the constituency of Temberley Prospect, Mr. Speaker, and 2 in the Cape Breton Nova constituency. And I do know that these, Mr. Speaker, I do know that these honourable members, Mr. Speaker, I do know that these honourable members, quite interested in their community and the community-minded individuals that they are, have worked very closely with the citizens in their communities to try to make some sort of accommodations with respect to having access to the P3 schools. And the access to those P3 schools, Mr. Speaker, with respect to maybe brownies, maybe the Scout movement, maybe a seniors program, whatever could go into those P3 schools. Because, Mr. Speaker, I remember as a young person growing up in the rural community in a small fishing village how important a local community school was to the entire community. That local school not only was the focal point of education, Mr. Speaker, it was also the point whereby people had an interest in bringing issues and organizations had an interest in bringing forward. As a matter of fact, local community schools, even to this very day, are polling stations within communities, because that is where people recognize the place to go, that the place whereby they have the use of that facility, and it is theirs. And Mr. Speaker, although this Bill 48 has good intentions, I think that's about as far as it goes. The intention that it recognized through Bill 48 was the need to make available additional facilities whereby it wouldn't put an added cost to government, yet in turn government would turn around and introduce healthy programs that could be administered out of school facilities for the citizens. And I think that that in itself is a good thing. I absolutely don't see anything wrong with that at all, Mr. Speaker. The problem is that it goes to the point whereby there are no definitions, and I do know that my the honourable member from Cole Harbour made comment with respect to definitions. It doesn't go to the point of defining what is an organization, who is entitled to the use of these facilities, how many people make up a group of individuals that would have access to these facilities. And Mr. Speaker, this is significant to the constituency that I represent of Dartmouth North. I know that we went through 2 years ago school closures in that community. There were actually 2 school closures, one the Notting Park School and the other the Northbrook School closure, as a result of indicating that these schools were surplus to the educational needs and that the population could be dispensed over. Those facilities were used primarily for some meetings, so it squeezed up and used and demanded a greater use for the existing school facilities that were there. The people in the constituency of Dartmouth North are in a unique position in most parts of the province, because inside proper of the city of Halifax and Dartmouth, there is an agreement that in fact the schools actually belong to the municipality. They are in fact the property of the school board until they become surplus to the municipality, until they become surplus to the needs of the school board. Once they become surplus to the needs of the school board, they're reverted back to the municipality. And that's under a formula that members on the government side understands, whereby the land was dedicated to the Department of Education. I think that's the appropriate term, dedicated to the Department of Education to build the facilities, knowing full well that it would come back to the municipality. Under that kind of an arrangement, Mr. Speaker, the facilities proper themselves, the physical structure, the physical plant, in fact, Mr. Speaker, is administered by the school board. The playgrounds and the ground areas adjacent to the school are maintained and administered by the municipality under an agreement with the school board. So you tell me how this bill in